Hello class, welcome back. Today in figure drawing, I want you to pull out this particular one, and it's going to say on it assignment for September 15th. And over the last couple of days, I've kind of walked you through ideas, first with gesture. We spoke much about gesture as being relationships of parts, and that we try to see things in a unity. And then we went on to proportions and some landmarks within the figure. Oh, Pam, could you get the skeleton? And then I went to proportions and landmarks of the figure. And with those landmarks, I do want to touch upon them one more time before we get started, just in case there was any problem with them. And also we talked a little bit about Riley's technique of rhythmic connections between the rib cage and the lower body and the lower to the upper, and how upper leg fits to the lower in terms of convex and concave. So today we're going to be taking up this idea now of taking these kind of beanbag shapes, two-dimensional shapes, and trying to turn them more three-dimensional. So we're going to be dealing with what we call surfaces, which are planes, and planes ultimately come together with other planes and you get plane breaks. We're going to place those at strategic places. That's going to give our form, our beanbags and our two-dimensional shapes more structure. So this particular handout that you have, when you look at it, is what you're going to see is on that first page. You're going to see the first one with a back view. I'm sure all of you've got it in your hands now. So the first one to the left is a back view, and you see the two-dimensional shapes. So they're just wide at the shoulders, narrow at the waist, as you already know. In the next one, the figure is turning a bit, so therefore you get what we call a plane break. That's that surface on the inside, and that's telling us where the rib cage is making its turn. So those are known as plane breaks. So on our ideas, when we're thinking of, say, an idea, we can think of a plane as just a flat shape. And that's a plane that's parallel, as all of you know, to the picture plane. And then what will happen is, as we begin to angle these and put a top plane, say where the turn of a rib cage would be, is what would happen is there would ultimately have a form there, and that form being, I'm going to darken this because I know you guys might not be able to see it. I'm going to get rid of this in a minute, but just so that you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But I'm sure all of you have had beginning drawing, and all this is what was in the handout. So we got a front plane, we got a side plane, we got a top plane, and as we know, we construct our illusions out of these planes. So we're going to take a look at that today, as well as how to think a little bit in terms of curves. And we're going to look at two ways of doing the torso. And so the torso being on our little skeleton here, being the rib cage and of course the pelvis. So we've talked a little bit about the beanbag, and we'll go back to doing that as well. Our landmarks, just to go over them, if you get online, you'll be able to see the terminology. But the chromium process is this point here on the scapula. When you turn the back, is what you're going to see is the spine of the scapula doing that. This is our scapula. And the scapula rolls around to the front where the clavicle meets it, right about right there. And so what happens is, that's known as the chromium process. Our beanbag on the top represented that corner, represented the corner on the other side, represented our 12th rib here at the bottom. Okay. We talked a little bit about the sternum, and we talked a little bit about the opening of the rib cage, and we talked about the highest point on the back of the rib cage of the 7th vertebrae spine, which have become important for us. The pelvis, which is here, so the lower part of the torso, We've got the crest of the pelvis, which is important to understand. All artists get familiar with this curve that's right here. And then this point and this point, most students would just call them the pelvis points. In anatomy, when you look them up, it's called the anterior superior iliac spine. So you want to be aware of those. That's a very crucial landmark that you can find on almost every model. And then the pubic bone, the middle of the pubic bone, giving us this triangle to locate the front. So if the figure's turned a little bit, the triangle turns a little bit, and you see more of one side than the other. Now we're going to run lines, and we're going to create sides and fronts. So with those sorts of things in mind, is what you're going to notice after I do this. You guys are going to be doing two different types of drawing. So to make this absolutely clear, the first type you're going to do is the first type that I'm going to show you. And it's going to be doing boxy shapes, kind of like the handout I gave you, of the upper part and the lower part of the body. The second part, we're going to put in rib cages and try to use curves. So we can do the torso in terms of curvilinear shapes, and we can do it with angles. And so I just want you to do some of each. So there's only two different things you're doing after this. That's going to be drawing torsos with angles, and the other one with spherical types of curves. So is what we're going to do, and I'm going to start with the first one as the top of the shoulders as a slight angle, and I'm going to pull it down ever so little. And then I'm going to bring this out a little bit, and so I'm going to bring it out. I'm kind of imagining the bottom of the rib cage there, and then I'm going to curve it in a little bit. So I'm going to kind of go back after, very much similar to what you might have done with the beanbag approach. I could begin to think of slight angles. I could go like this. So I could think of a little angle there, thinking there's where I want an angle, and here's where I want an angle. Ultimately, we'll start to set it up. So in other words, with a simple beanbag, we can just do something like this, and then know where this is, and then bring this around and bring this out, and you have a kind of a beanbag shape, especially if you have a curve up there. So as what we're doing now is, I'm imagining a front plane and a side plane, so I'm putting a plane break. As soon as I put a plane break there, it already suggests to the mind, even though it's flat in here, it suggests to the mind a movement, a change of direction. So if I do this, and then I'm going to say my rib cage is going to come down to, say, here. I'm going to place a light guideline on here. And then I'm going to bring this, and this is going to be the plane break on the inside of the form, giving me where the rib cage is going to change directions. So now I've got one angle. This angle is going to correspond. This angle is coming through, paralleling that angle. And now I'm going to put a little bit underneath. And I'm going to now do the same on this side. I'm going to put an underplane. So this is where it starts to differ from our last ones. So now we've got an underplane going this way. And if I need to, I'll go back and darken these for you guys, because I know this charcoal I'm using is not real dark. Okay, so now we've got our first box for the rib cage, and we can kind of see its angle. It's a light line, you might not see it, but I'm going to go back over it. Anyways, I'm going to come back with the bottom. So I'm going to say the front of the pelvis now is going to be here. So I'm going to place along my guideline, just like the beanbag. Now I'm using it as a guideline to relate these two pieces together. Now I'm going to say the front of this pelvis is going to here, and now I'm going to make my change to it going this way. So now we've got a block, so now we've got to connect this. So now you got to kind of start to think in terms of fronts and sides. So we've got this figure turned a little bit, so therefore you're going to get that type of thing. Now I'm drawing through it. I want you to do the same. Try to imagine through it. There's all kinds of reasons for doing this. I can ultimately figure out where the sacrum would be. But anyways, if we were to say on something like this, if I put an X on it, and I'll make this just a little darker. If I put an X on it, it would tell me a bit of where my center is and how that center would curve. I'm going to try to get just a little better. It's going to curve and swing us around this way. Okay. So we've got our centers. The only other thing that I'm going to do to this, and you can do it on yours, to show these planes that go back, feel free to take your pencil, soft pencil, and darken the plane that's going in. Darken the plane that's on the side. It's nice, I mean, they can be the same value, but if you want, they could be two different values. So what it's going to do is it's going to start to bring out the feeling of the front construction, and then do the same here. So these get the feel that the angle is going down because the perspective is going down. I've got it tilted up. So now we've got a simple construction block tilted in space, and it lends its way to our next steps, which then would ultimately be, if I put a rib cage in here, I could use a curve, but we're going to keep these now as blocks. You can go as far on yours into your blocks if you so desire, especially if you're in intermediate or advanced. I would have you put the opening of the pelvis this way, using those angles, because this is where the turn would be. So I would have you place the pubic bone in there, and the opening and our points. It would be here on the pelvis, and of course here, and of course here. And so now we've got our first little block form. So what I'm going to do is show you another one. With the next one, I'm going to show it to you as a back view. And so what we'll do is think a little bit about the top of the box this way. So I'm going to turn it in the opposite direction as this last one. So I'm going to do this with it. And then I'm going to angle the rib cage. This is representing the rib cage, and it's angling in and angling this way. And we'll put the feel of this. So now you can kind of get the sense that this is my center, the turn of where the head would be. This is the back moving at an angle. I'm going to put a little space in here between the rib cage and the pelvis. I'm going to add just a little bit more from the beanbag. I am going to watch this line, of this vertical line. I want this back of the ribs out a little further than the pelvis, so I'll probably take it to about there. And then we're going to take a plane break. On the models, when you notice them online, I'm going to have you watch for this. On the gluteus maximus, on the stronger turn of the form, we're going to put a plane break there like I'm doing here and come along with it this way. This angle of the rib cage now is tilted up, so watch your angles when you're drawing from the models online. Watch what those angles are going to do. That'll do that. This, if it was kind of like our bean bag, it would kind of flow around and connect, right? So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to connect these 2 points and make an angle going this way, so you can see the block tilted for the pelvis. So now we've got, it should be pretty clear what's going on now. I am going to tilt this out just a little bit. There we go. So our center line now is doing this. These, what's known as perspective center lines, become crucial to the whole process. This one, I just put an X on it. This one, I'm moving over a little bit to our left center line. And now the curve of the gluteus maximus would curve around the form as I'm doing it here, this way. So you got this triangle in here, as all of you are familiar with because of our proportions and talking about the sacrum. And then as what you would see is a little concave feel and then a convex that would connect. So this is the triangle of the sacrum. That's what's nice about boxes, is this edge of the top of the cube will be this edge of the top of the triangle of the sacrum. This will curve in, this will curve in around their form, and you got your triangle. This is the top of the edge of the pelvis from the back. I'm just going to bring it to the construction block so that you can kind of get a sense of the whole thing. Side of the form, side of the form, side of the form. If this was to go a very little bit further than what I've got it, is what I would do with it is, and again, if with the beginning, I would just take them this far. I would just try to take it to where you get the blocks working right, trying to watch your plane brakes, where the major forms turn. This block we know is tilted. If you get on the site again and look at Proko, Proko, he'll have things like this online. Is what he does, and I think sometimes it's a good policy. You could put a little point up there to where the neck would come out. Like sometimes we try to imagine that, or I try to imagine the front into the stomach, a light line coming through. But he'll put a little point there on north and a little point on south. If something, it shows that something's tilted. This you wouldn't see it obviously because it's tilted back. So this you would see it because it's tilted in the other direction. Those of you that are in intermediate or advanced is what I would like you to do. If this was the stomach coming in, what would it look like? So it would curve in and around. You might be able to get the sense that the leg is going to begin to move out of there like this. And if there was a leg in there, there would want to be a curve here of how the leg would move into that block. And if you just start imagining that, I wouldn't do the whole leg. I would just say if you're an intermediate or advanced, how might these pieces start to come together? Mostly is what I'm after is the torsos, especially for drawing one. If otherwise, see if you can extend a little bit and see where you can go with it. What I'm going to do is show you another one here. Maybe I'll just put it a little bit lower. So what I'm going to do is place it, I think, about right here. So what I'm going to do is place a block. I'm going to place a top. So this is the top of a cube, like we're looking down. This then is going to come in kind of concave, like it's coming down. I'm going to imagine roughly where the pelvis is. Now I'm going to take from a front angle, like I did, like I was showing you a little bit here. I'm going to imagine front, because if you can do this, and imagine side, I can connect this. And I can come up with, now I'm kind of coming up with a glorified bean shape, okay? But I'm connecting these points. Now you guys know what I'm doing. This is going to be a person. The front of the body is going to be to my right over here. So what I'm doing is where somebody's legs would be, if I cut their legs off, and this is going to be important to do on poses, and this is the side, this is the front, so you're imagining somebody with no legs, basically. This is the top of my cube, where it's a person bent, sitting. So now I can begin to look at this angle. And so now we can see that moving in. It's going to be somewhat parallel to this. These angles, because they're cubes, this is going to be parallel to that. So I'm going to do this with it. So now I can connect my points. This is going to flow through for the rib cage, and it's going to angle back. I'm using a gentle curve, but use straights at this point in order to keep these things in place. So now we've got the upper part of the body. We know that if the head was in here, it's going to be way down here because you got the shoulders there, and our center line is moving down. If I was to look at the lower part, I'm going to use another cube, and I'm going to think of the pelvis like this, and an angle coming this way, slight bend. I'll talk a little bit about our three-point perspective boxes, the way that we think of them in using the figure. So I'm going to bring this down a little lower than I had it, I think, about to here. And what I want to do is keep it exactly equal to the one above. I am going to connect these, so I'm going to use coming across as if you're seeing the top of that cube. All right? So I'm going to darken those lines just a little bit so I know that everybody can see them well. So what happens is we've got our side, our front, We're now seeing the cube as if it's looking down on the top of it, because we are, and I want you to do this with the figure. Try to imagine it this way. This is definitely conceptual drawing. And so now we've got our top. Okay. So if you can get a figure this far from our two-dimensional bean bags to this type of situation, you're well on your way to adding three-dimensional forms to the arms and legs. So if this was coming down a little bit for the rib cage, so this is, say, would be our sternum, then we're going to come, it would turn a little bit for the stomach, and then you'd be down here at the pelvis, okay? Watch these center lines. Drawing one, I need you to put them on there. With drawing one, I need you to take it as far as I just have taken this particular one. But I know I just have to adjust my charcoal here. But I know there's intermediate and advanced in this class. And so with them, I'm going to have them go just a little bit further. So with our drawing advanced, I want you to imagine the top of this, the neck was there. Again, drawing one, do not have to do this. If you want to attempt it, feel free. You're free to do it. The rib cage, then I could imagine it in here like this. I want you to kind of, especially the advanced people, I need you to do this. Think through it, the perspective this way. So now we've got a curve within that block. Within this, I'm going to imagine the opening of the pelvis. So it's going to come this way. And we're going to imagine where the pubic bone is, and on this side coming this way. And we're going to place it in here. Okay. So now we're at a good standing to connect other parts. Kind of like this one, with anybody that's a little in the advance, is what a person could do is just get the top of the legs, is what I'm asking for the advanced people, because you might have already done this sort of thing. A leg would be here, the muscle would start here. And I'm going to kind of show it to you a little bit. This is where we're going to be going for all of us in our next class. So I'm just going to introduce it to the advanced people. And again, any beginners that want to try, you're free to do it. So this is if I did cross sections. If this is the leg, because the muscle of the leg would start here off the top of the pelvic point. And what we're going to be doing is connecting a leg. And on a leg, all of you remember back to drawing, basic drawing one, our ellipses come off of 90-degree angles. So this would be in this way, and this would come through here like this. So then we would get the feel of the leg in there. And this one, I'm going to make it just a little wider, okay? So it only take me a minute, and then we're going to move on. This one's going to move this way and slightly down. So if this leg is moving in this direction, my center line is here, and it's going slightly down this way. So the ellipse would turn. Again, in our next class, we're going to be spending lots of time with everybody, but again, with advanced, intermediate, experiment with maybe how the forms might move out, okay? Now, is what our cube tells us in all of this is that the side of the rib cage, if I was to put on ribs or details and muscles, which I'm not, the strokes would follow our direction of the block. So they would go this way, out, and around, like this, and curve back up again. And they would then give us the feel of the form that lies underneath. So our block shapes are usually our better shapes of constructing ideas, because it gives us the sense of the form that ultimately lies underneath. Okay. I'm going to do one last idea with this block type surface, but hopefully all of you got those, because I'm going to erase this very top part of it. I'm going to do one quick last one, and then I'm going to show you a couple of things with curves. With the last one is what I want to do is kind of show you, this is kind of a la Bridgman, he thinks a lot this way. I'm just going over the lines so so you guys can see them basically. I'm going to take a top of a cube and I'm going to do this with it. And then I'm going to bend this in a little bit. And this side, we're going to bring it around like this. I'm going to show I'll get out of your way here in a minute. I'm going to show a little bit of the underside like this. So anyways, we got our first cube in place for the rib cage. So you can tell by the cube which way we're looking in space. Bean bags, a lot of times you can't. This, we know, again, we're looking up at it, and we see a little bit of the right side. It's to the left of our field of vision. So if I was to then think a little bit of maybe how I would want the pelvis to be, I'm going to radically turn it this way. And we're going to turn the block a little bit in this direction. A little bit underneath, not much. So there's our two blocks. Now, Bridgman would have students. If you're not familiar with George Bridgman, I would look him up. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with George Bridgman. George Bridgman had the students make a little mannequin, and he would do these out of balsam wood for a rib cage, pelvis, and a head. And then they would twist them on a piece of wire. And then they would start to understand how these things work. So this is kind of the style you would have experimented with him if you had him as a teacher. I'm going to watch a 90-degree angle off of the rib cage to kind of get a sense for the angle of the head. So I'm going to take a bottom of his head and do this with it. And I'm going to put a little bit of perspective to the cube that I'm about to do like this. So there's a tilt to it. So it's more in 3-point perspective, this angle. Then I'm going to run this back. In anatomy or in figure drawing, we use a lot of 3-point perspective situations with heads. So this is another little cube. So I'm doing it just out of cubes. But by the cubes and the angles that I have here, you can tell which way the figure is turned. This line, we are going to talk about heads in the next class. And what happens is this is a plane break between the hairline and the top of the head. So this would be doing this. Just like the blocks of the rib cage and pelvis. This particular one, I just wanted to show you one with a head. We will get more involved with that, of course. So this is the blocks. Into the blocks is what then is nice to do, is imagine a rib cage, especially for, again, intermediate and advanced. I'm going to have you guys do that. So if you imagine that rib cage in there, I'm bringing it up to the 7th vertebrae spine. I'm bringing it up just a little bit in this position because of my angle. It wouldn't even angle up probably as much, probably about to there. The center of my rib cage would probably be somewhere about here. And then this would be the opening of it. So I'm going to kind of imagine it. So this would be in here coming through. And then what I'm going to do is, just for the fun of it, for those of you who want to see where all of this goes, I'm going to put a pectoral muscle in there. And it's going to come up because the pectoral muscle angles to your arm. This is for the benefit of those that are advanced. We would see underneath that pectoral muscle like this. It would go to my construction line, and this muscle would tuck under this line. So it would do like this, around, over. So that's going to give us a little feel for the upper mass of the deltoid muscle. So you can see the plane break, the curve crossing over it, so it gives us the perspective. If there was an arm, I'm just going to curve this up, the deltoid muscle over, and I'm just going to cut it off. And the arm would connect in here, like this. So again, mostly for benefit of advanced people to kind of see a little bit of where these things ultimately will go. Our pelvis is going to be in here, so this line's doing this. Our center line going back. The basic people want to put that center line on there, and then the opening of the pelvis. Keep watching that. Keep trying to imagine how would that be in there, the opening of that pelvis. Eventually, you're going to find out there's stomach muscles here. I'm just going to show you the connection, and this starts wide, and it comes all the way to a point. And these would bend in and move to a point like this. And that's going to make our connections, rib cage moving around, and then we're going to get the feel of the side of the body, the oblique muscle here, and of course the one would be all bulged up on the other side. That's our cubes idea, okay? So what you're going to be doing is, for you, is stopping the video at this point. And you're going to go and you're going to be doing what it's going to say in the assignment. You're going to look up some models, and you're going to be putting in these boxy shapes. I think I might have you doing 10 of them, but read it and make sure it is 10. And then once you're done doing that, turn the tape back on, and we'll be talking a little bit about curved surfaces. I'll start in a second. I'm going to get rid of these. Welcome back. I'm going to show you maybe 3 different things of curved surfaces. The boxes are probably our most effective, but I want to show you both. Sometimes we interchange them once you get to understand them, but I'm having you take them separate at the moment. So, what we're going to do is start off like, say, the beanbag. I got to watch where I place this because I'm going to do a couple of others, so I'm going to move it over. So what I'm going to do is start off, as I just said, as kind of, I want to get these lines sharp and clean for you. And I'm going to put a little bit of a curve to it, coming out in this direction. I'm going to think of roughly where the rib cage might be, and then I'm going to turn the bottom of it ever so slightly like this. And then on the other side, we're going to think, again, a little bit like the beanbag, and we're going to bring this in a little bit. And then thinking of kind of the rib cage, and then I'm going to take this and I'm going to bring it out a little bit. And if it was boxy, this would be my plane break. And if it was a little bit boxy, this would be an angle. And so I'm just going to kind of watch a little bit of planes on the inside. This would angle a little bit. So I kind of think, even though I'm thinking curves, I'm trying to imagine into it a little bit. My center of where the center of the neck would be and the opening of your neck would be there. So what I'm going to do with this is put in an opening like this. So we know about the top, the curve. So we're going to do that with it. The bottom of the rib cage is going to be here, and there'll be an angle to it, so it's going to be angling in this direction. So I'm going to make a curve to this. I'm going to angle it up a little bit this way because of the way it's moving. And angle it how I did with the plane break, because if this was in perspective, this would be a plane here, which will be in a little bit. So I'm going to place that rib cage in. I'm going to try to get the lines dark enough so you can see them well. So there's a simple curve of our rib cage. A lot of times with our curved shapes, you can start just like you've done with a beanbag, and then you can begin to place the placement of a rib cage. It's one of the ways to do it. There's other ways to do curved surfaces, and I'm going to show you one other way. Different things work for different methods, for different poses, I guess I should say. So my center line, I'm going to bring it a little bit more over here, and I'm going to then think through that center down to the pelvis. So with the pelvis, we're going to go from here to here. So just like the cube, we're going to watch the front. However, we're going to think now through it. Now you can use elliptical shapes like going around, but most of us with doing the figure will think planes. We'll do this. We think angles, but while we're doing these angles, we use curves. So in other words, we think this angle, we think this angle, we think this angle, we think this angle. So technically, we're thinking like a box, but we're using curves when we do it, if that makes any sense to you. So I'm thinking the back. We want the back because eventually we want to be able to locate where the sacrum would be. It's going to be an important idea. But right now, I'm just getting you ready for it. So this is coming around where I kind of feel the curve coming around. I know that this is a plane break in here. So then we try to get a sense of a curve. So the curve is going this way and around. So now I'm going to put the pelvis a little more into curves. So now we've got a curve for the side. Cuts off a little bit of the boxiness of what it was. And on our other side, we're going to then locate in a moment. So I'm going to take this and curve this a little bit. So now we got more of our curve situation, more like a doll shape, if you will. What I'm going to do is take my long guide construction line here from, we know that this is what? It's the chromium process. If you take from the chromium process and you run a line, a construction line, right to the pubic bone, as we did the first day, I'm going to show you some of the, when we did proportions and rhythms, I'll show you these connections. So this line from the chromium process is going to roll through here like this and come around and curve. So if I do this, it's going to give me the side plane on a curved surface. So I'm doing that. And on the other side, it's the chromium process would be right where I've got it. It would hit here, but now it's going to pull in this way into the crotch area. So these are coming around for the rhythmic landmarks, but we're doing it over curved surfaces. So now this is the center, the opening of the pelvis would be right about where I've got it. So it's going to be right here. I'm just going to make it a little clearer. Right about where my construction line hit. They usually hit pretty close. And then watch the angle for where the pubic bone would be. So it's going to be here. And then it's going to pick up that line because that's our rhythmic line, and it's going to do this. Now I'm going to darken those lines because I know I've got a lot of lines in there so that you're able to see them. So this becomes the crest of the pelvis. And this is my opening of the pelvis. This is the crest turning back. Okay. So you get the opening there, okay, which is connected here to our lines. This, I'll just darken it too, so that you can see it. Our curve now becomes a nice curved surface. This is our back line, so I'll just kind of leave it. What's going to happen up here is when we get to the opening of the rib cage, we've got the sternum bone coming down, and it's going to come to about here. I'm going to make an angle. Always good sometimes at the bottom of the sternum bone. Watch these angles. In figure drawing, you try to get them accurate, and usually it's a little narrower this way. It gets wider at a point down here, not quite as wide as I've got it. I'm exaggerating, but I'm going to do that. And then is what you're going to do is you're going to get the opening of the rib cage, and it's going to touch here on the rib cage. This is our 12th rib here. right where the line construction is, okay? So I'm kind of showing you this in curves, a little different than the blocks. However, is what you're seeing also is going back to the other day when we worked with the landmarks, because I want to reiterate that now thinking a little more informed. Where this line construction, because you can use this on your figure drawings, you can do that like we did what we're doing with proportions. You can do that. You can get your widest angle, which would be like that, and then you could begin to run these angles down, right? You can, like we did on that first day, you can run these angles down, and you can pick up the feel of the whole lower part of the body. But anyways, this angle meets this angle. This is the side of the rib cage. The way it would be on a rib cage, the side would continue here, and it would pick up this line. So is what would happen is our angle, like I've got it, is this way, and the strokes of it are going to go this way. You can shade it in if you want. This would carry over, and it's going to give you the feel of the rib cage in perspective. So I've got it tilted back ever so little. Therefore, I know the lines would go over it this way, the same as this is going to pick up the feeling of this going in this direction. So you can darken those a bit if you want. Sometimes even taking the top, it never hurts. Maybe a gray that's a little different. And it's what it'll do is it'll show you the terms of the forms and the relationships of them. Okay. The other way to work a curved surface, which is the way if you get into, I'll write it up here again, Proco. If you get into Proco, he won't, he doesn't show this sort of thing, but he will show a little bit of what I'm about to show you. So another way to look at these things is kind of like a bean. You can use bean bags, beans. This is an axis line that I'm thinking of. And so is what I'm going to do is think of a kind of an egg shape going in this direction is what I want to do. Because this is going to be the top of the rib cage, right? The rib cage is an egg shape. So I'm just using an axis line. Don't be afraid to use axis lines. That is not the perspective center line. It's an axis line. I'm going to get rid of it in a minute. So if this is the rib cage, I'm thinking of a front. This is around the front of it where I'm stroking. And now I'm going to connect it to a pelvis down here. But these are now curved surfaces. So I'm going to connect it around. I'm going to think of side, back, and I'm going to swing it around like this. So it's going to be a bean-looking kind of configuration. Okay. Now, I'm going to get rid of my center axis line because it's not the perspective center line, and that'll get you confused. Now, this is another way to do curves. This way is relating to what we did in the proportions using this arithmetic connection. This can work very well. This can work very well. Either one, both, whatever you feel most comfortable with. It's fun to experiment with both. If something overlaps, like this rib cage is overlapping ultimately the hips or the pelvis, then is what we do is you get in the habit when you're working online from the model and you strengthen that to show that this is now in front of that, okay? Now, what we're going to do is, since this is our top high point, we're going to say that the clavicle bones, which is here, I didn't put them in, but if I do, they would, as you know, they would come up like, just so I can relate these two drawings together. They would come up in here. I'll make them a little darker over these lines. They curve up a little bit. That's the chromium process. I'll make it dark so you can see it. And so therefore, there's our landmarks. Okay. So this clavicle bone, without the curves in it, now I'm imagining it going this way, okay? And my center line now, this is front, and so now my center line is coming this way. So as soon as I put a center line in here, you'll start to see what direction I'm thinking of this. So this is our center line, and it's coming down, and it's going to move down and fade out here. So this is our perspective center line. So don't get them confused, those of you in beginning life drawing. Axis lines go through the center, and you're trying to get an axis of something. The perspective center line is the actual center of the form in terms of how you're seeing it. So it would do this. This now is a shorthand method of doing this. And so it's saying this is the top of the shoulder girdle doing this. Therefore, this top part, this is the curve of the top, the opening. Again, if any of you get into Proco's site, is what he'll do is put a dot here. It's a great way to do it, or if you want to just put the opening, either way. But there's a plane change from there to there, and that wants to be clear. So we're saying that this angle is one angle and this angle is another angle. Anyways, as this comes down this way, it tells us this is the bottom of our rib cage. So if we kind of take as our sternum bone, say if now this is the opening of this is, I'll just identify it a little more like I did on that one. So this is our sternum bone now. Now we're trying to get a sense for how would the ribs go. So there's an angle. This one is cutting in, so like this one, it would be inside, so it would be like here. And so now we're taking this to this angle, and we're bringing this to this angle. So now we're doing that. So we got this angle going. So in other words, our first simple construction, like a block, is going to give us the right perspective. That's the power of starting with a shape and turning it into a center line in a form. Perspective is already built in. With the pelvis, this opening of the pelvis are three very important landmarks as we go back and think of them. 1, 2, 3. Now, what are they doing here? So now you get the sense of the form. So if this is the curve, I have to think around this form. So I could go like that and say this here, that's now this, and this point is now represented by this point. The perspective has got a foul. So this is that point. There's my second one, which then puts my third one here. And so you got to feel the line curve over the form. So now that becomes your triangle. So is what it does is it keeps everything in the right place. Okay, all falling on the front. Like drawing through this, like I did on the curve, you would do the same here. You would try to get the sense and you would draw through this. So you're drawing through the whole thing. And so you're seeing this, I'll get out of your way. You're seeing this as a cross section coming through, because that tells me a lot. There might be a plane there. This might be my side. The back might be starting here. And so it gives me all kinds of information to how this form could be dissected. Okay. So basically, that's how this sort of thing works. My plane break, I mean, if I had my simple construction like we just did, this would then pull over this way. This would pull over this way. If I do this, I can do the same thing. And is what it's going to do, it's going to give me, like it did on this one, on a curved surface, it's going to give me the plane break. So then I would know this would meet this. This would be my plane break. This would be my turn of my forms. They would do this. So this whole side, this like what we said is overlapping. This is our 12th rib. I'm just going to stroke these in so you can see over that. And it gives us the feel of our side view. Okay? And our line construction, if I darken it, would do this. Let's make them a little stronger for you. And there it is. So now we've got this angle in right perspective, this angle in right perspective, and we would be ready at this point to begin to construct other things onto the torso. The torso is a crucial guide to all of everything else we're going to do on top of all of this. I'm just fussing with the charcoal because with this stick I've got to adjust it periodically. Okay, I want to show you in a way just one more of these, and just from a front view, and then I'm going to stop. So is what I'm going to do with this one from a front view is go back to kind of the beanbag feel and just kind of associate it, because this technique, both of them are a little different, similar in idea, but a little different. So if we go back to the beanbag idea, I'm going to think of just a front view. So if I have a front view, we can think of it this way. I can think of my center line, and I can try to imagine now the bottom part of the hips, say, coming around. I'm overlapping this because if you remember back to Riley, this would go from the opening of the rib cage. I'm just guessing where it is, like you would be doing as well. And so this is the bottom part. Remember, beanbags that I originally showed you, it's kind of a combination between angles and curves. That's why animators use it. They use it because, see my bottom line here? It's not straight. It's a subtle curve. If you're using beanbags, the top is a subtle curve. They do it this way so that when they run through the clavicle bones like this, they already got a subtle curve showing them the high point of the opening of the rib cage. So then if they begin to place the opening of the rib cage like this, again, I'll try to get this dark enough. I'll go over the lines. So I'm going to do this. So if I have now my opening of the rib cage like this, now I've got it going to my high point, and at the high point they would use it as the original beanbag curve, and then they run through their direction. It's a little higher than this because the clavicle bones would pull up to that line. So they've got it down to a wonderful simplified formula. So anyways, this does this. I'm overlapping this and coming out with roughly where I want the hips to be. I'm just refining it. So anyways, with my rib cage, I'm going to imagine the bottom of it here, and now I'm just going to put in a curve. So I'm going to connect these points. And like we talked about when we did this before, you can let the rib cage run low, like I'm doing. If I let it run low, it usually hits the navel in almost every account. If you let these lines of a rib cage just flow through and not hamper them, play around with them much. The sternum bone now is here, so that's going to be in place. I'm going to make it a little bit wide, and then I'm going to put the end to it just real clear. On yours, mark them clear, so I'm going to mark a clear placement for it. Now, what I'm going to do is say this is roughly the navel, so this is the bottom of our rib cage. So what I'm going to do is place the top of the pelvis. Now we're using curve shapes. Draw all the way through. So I'm making a curve all the way through. It's not a box. Again, we're working with curve shape. So put that ellipse in there. The ellipse is coming from the top of the crest of the pelvis. So I'm trying to get a good ellipse in there that all of you can see. Now the high point of the back of the pelvis, if any of you ever want to take the initiative and look up skeletons online, the high point of the back of the pelvis is actually where your navel is. So the navel should be in the right spot. This placement I've got should work. So if it makes a curve like that, that tells me it's tilted very little. On a female figure, the pelvis is tilted a little. Therefore, now my pelvic points, one's going to be here, one's going to be here. Okay, so I'm just going to mark those. The lower part of the pubic bone is now going to be here. So I'm going to place that. So now we're going to place in the opening of the pelvis. So that opening of the pelvis, and this is one of the things I really want to stress working this way with masses, this opening on the pelvis tells it where the alignment is to the upper part of the body. This one, as you can see, flows through. The opening of the pelvis is angled out this way. This front of the body is moving this way. The direction is this way. The direction is this way. This is front and center. So if you get those things right, it's amazing how well your figures can look. Details can be nice, but they're not essentials. So this becomes, again, going back to the other day, I'm just trying to reiterate all of this as we use curved surfaces. So now we've got those points, as all of you should be well aware of. I'm going to darken the front crest, hits the edge of the body, there's a curve, the pelvis would look like that. Now, we're using curved surfaces, therefore this would start to curve in like this. And on this side, it would curve in like this. It would be kind of like a dowel shape. I'll darken it a little bit on the inside. So now we're going to structure the curve inside rather than a block. So now you get more of what looks like a plastic child's doll. The opening of the rib cage is going to open from here, and I'm going to bring it around once like this, and I'm going to make a turn to it here. So I'm going convex, concave, because I'm estimating this is where the plane break will be when I bring my construction line. So I'm going to go convex, concave, trying to estimate this line when I run it through this way. It should hit there pretty close. So again, I'm going to use the same guidelines coming through the figure as I used here and as I used here. So I'm going from my chromium process, which is this point, and I'm running it through where I estimated the plane break. So every time planes change, as we talked about, every time a plane changes direction, you can run a line. Now, most people don't do that, but this is a plane break from here, distinctly different than here. You need a line to show the viewer what that means. So in other words, if this is a plane break, this direction, I'll do it with this so you can see it. The opening of the rib cage, this direction has got to be different than this direction. It's a plane break. So this direction is different from this direction. It's a plane break. And so I'm going to then slightly darken the rib cage, and then I'm going to pretty much leave it. The only other thing that would be here is a muscle known as the oblique muscle. It would connect like this. I'm just going to loosely place it in. It would connect to the crest of the pelvis. Those of you that are aware of some of the anatomy will know that. So this line would do this, and it completes the feeling of the connection of this curve to the crest of the pelvis to there. This line puts, this division line that we use puts a plane break in here on our oblique muscle. So all the form is now set. There's the form on my oblique muscle. I can easily stroke it. On the rib cage, it would do this. And we've got one on the other side because now we're front and center. So I'll put a little bit of it on the other side. So there's our plane breaks on our curved forms. Center line, navel. Last thing I'm putting in, and then I will leave you. Navel would go here. Okay. And we know our widest points are what, class? I don't hear anything. So this is known as the great trochanter. Don't forget that. The bone is going to come out in that direction. That's our widest point, our halfway point. With that, class, I'm going to leave you. And what you're going to do now is go and work with 10 more drawings. This time, try to experiment with your curves. Okay? And I'll see you next time.